Hello and welcome to episode 325 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. My name is Mark. With me, as always, are Nealon the Orange Tank.
Hello.
And Kellen the Red Tank, who I caught mid-sip there, but he got out of it like a pro.
Yeah, I can modulate how quick. The timing of my water intake to be here for this beloved podcast series.
Absolutely. And this is probably among the most beloved of the series, as it is going to be another Mark-centric episode, as I count down my top 50 games of all time, games 30 through 11. If you want to hear the first part, 50 through 31, go ahead and listen to two episodes back, which probably you have already listened to, so I don't know why I gave that caveat. So let's just get right into it.
I thought you were going to say, just we'll be here. Just we'll wait.
You guys now are in like a real competition with each other to see who can pump up the numbers for Nealon versus Mark episodes.
Yeah, this is just a ratings fight, is how I am looking at it, so yeah. Okay, but let's get into it. Game number 30. This is up 8 spots. This is a party game, among my favorite party games, but as most of my favorite party games are, very tension-inducing, anxiety-inducing. Probably the most anxiety-inducing of them all, Anomia. For those who don't know, is a party game that consists of just a deck of cards with subjects and symbols. And on your turn, you're going to flip your card face up. And if your symbol matches anybody else's symbol at the table, you have to name something that qualifies on that person's card before they name something that's on your card. So, for example, if I flip my card up and it's a star, and around the table, Nealon has previously flipped up a star, and his card says flavor of ice cream, and my card says type of bread, I have to name something on Nealon's card, flavor ice cream vanilla, before Nealon says rye, and whoever names it first gets the other person's card as a point. If Nealon gave me the card because I scored a point, he would flip his next card, and that may cause a cascade, and now Nealon's might have a hashtag, and that matches Kellen's hashtag, and now they're in a one-on-one battle. Anomia means that sort of situation where you're trying to think of something and you can't say it, and you go, and that is something that is true to this game. There's a lot of that going on as people are scanning the table.
Do you know what they call
realize
that?
Something's matched.
The heart mark? Do you know what they call that? Let me just read you the title of a review from BGG from 12 years ago for Anomia.
Okay.
A surprising game of sweat and quick ejaculations.
Very true. I mean, technically true.
So
can say that
that noise you made earlier, could you do it again?
Yeah. That is
Mark, this is a family show.
That is me struggling to ejaculate a word in Anomia. That's true. That is how it sounds.
This is a real review. I'm not making this up. I just want to be very clear.
I believe you. I
Okay.
believe you.
Okay, there was like a terrible person. Not me. I didn't come up with this.
No, but out of all the reviews, you chose it.
You got to be drawn to that, Mark. You see that in a list?
That's true. No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's certainly a headline grabber. How do you guys feel about Anomia?
I think it's great. It's been one of my long-standing favorite party games. It's one of the earliest I remember playing as well, and I've always had a good time with it. It's definitely in that realm of party games. I know that, not to preempt Kellen, but it can be quite stressful to the extent that it is just sometimes for a lot of people not very fun to play. But I adore it. It's always quite silly, which is high praise for any party game.
I think that this one works really well if everyone is approximately the same skill level. It's just a tough party game where there are groups of people where I feel like I can't even participate because I'm just slower than everyone else in the group. And so there are just like feel bad moments in this for me that are similar to like the drawing one that you guys like, Pictomania. So it just doesn't, it sort of just misses the mark for me where I can be like, this is going to always work. But with the right crowd where everyone's sort of at the same level, it's so loud and fun and tense because you're waiting for you to be involved. And part of winning is just like figuring out that, oh no, I'm involved this time. And like that tension is just there the entire game, which is fun.
And to that point, I love having party games that I can break out for people who are non-gamers or, for, just that are universal type games. And Anomia is certainly not one of them. Because if you have a couple people at the table who are taking the game more seriously than they should, aka me, then it can really make people who are, there for a lighter party game feel stressed out, and I totally get that. But it's hard. Once you start flipping those cards, it's hard for me to ratchet down my competitiveness. So. Anomia, game number 30, again, up 8 spots from last year. Game number 29, new to the list, although I feel like it's made a appearance before. This is Sidereal Confluence. For a while, this game...
Say the title, Mark. Are you a coward?
Sidereal Confluence Remastered Edition. How about that?
Wait, did they shorten the title on BGG?
Yeah. No, when the remastered version came out, they kind of dropped the whole subtitle.
They're cowards. They're cowards. What?
I know. It's sad. But it was a game that was off my list for a while, just because it's sort of like I guess you'd call it like a con game. It's a game that shines when you have a lot of people playing it and can take up a lot of space. So it's not a game that you feel like that can easily come out and you can throw on the table because you know pretty large table and you know a lot of people playing simultaneously. And so don't play it very often. So it sort of had waned in my memory, and then played it again recently and just remembered how much I love it. It's a game of sort of like Anomia, you know, for most of it simultaneous play where you are just making deals, you're shouting out, trying to get trades made. It is constructed in a way that encourages you to make trades. You are producing a lot of a resource that you don't really need so much of, and other people need your resource more than you do. And so it's sort of made in a way that trades are going to be welcomed by both sides. And so while you're trying to outdo your opponents in terms of how well you make out in deals, generally people walk away from most trades in Sidereal Confluence feeling like they got what they needed, at the very least, if not what they wanted. And so a unique game, very, very unique in that way, and one that I have enjoyed a great deal. And again, pops back up on my list after a little bit of an absence.
Have either of you played the expansion, Bifurcation?
Annoyingly, no. I have it, but haven't got around to playing it yet. And part of that is because Sidereal Confluence is one of those games where you teach it to a new group, and a lot of the more advanced factions end up just not getting played because there's always someone new that you're teaching it to. But I now have a work group that I've been playing it with. I've now played it twice with, so hoping to eventually move us on to Bifurcation. So hopefully next year I'll get a chance. Well, this year, rather.
I think that I sort of have turned on pure negotiation games because it often feels like the way to win is to find the mark and then them, as in not the mark is usually the one doing the in these economic, you know, trade heavy games, but it's almost like pick on the person who doesn't understand the value of things over and over again. And there's something really specific in Sidereal where you can be playing with 8 people and like you don't in a game of like 5 of Zoo Vadis, you can kind of control and just say, hey, man, that value is like radically out of line. And in an 8-player, 9-player game of Sidereal, it's a little harder to do. They do have guardrails with the sort of this equals that on the boards. Yeah. But it can feel LOL random if Mark like conned a grandma in the corner of the game of Sidereal and now I have no shot of winning it anymore. I don't know. And maybe that's my own turn on hardcore negotiation games.
The one thing that I do like about Sidereal that doesn't solve that entirely is that the relative economy of your game depends a lot on the combination of factions. So it's never going to be as easy as just turning to the same person and being like, hey, this is how I'm going to exploit you, because the economies like intersect in ways depending on like the resources that each faction has available. So there's nuance that you have to like manipulate depending on the game you're in.
All right. Number 28 is down 11 spots, but it is my top pure Cube Rails game. This is the one that started all, originally known as Wabash Cannonball, but most people know it today as Chicago Express. Chicago Express, as I mentioned, a Cube Rails game, so it is a simplified 18xx, although calling it a simplified 18xx is not really accurate because to say that Cube Rails sprung from 18xx, but it is a less complicated train game. If you're looking at the niche of train games, Cube Rails fall much, much lower than 18xx. But what it has is one of my favorite game mechanisms. We've already mentioned to some fanfare last time my love of time tracks, as Kellen mocked me for it. But my other favorite mechanism of gaming is route building in a way where you are striving to get something before your opponent. So I don't know if route building is exactly what you would call it, but what you would find in, as I mentioned before, Through the Desert and, you know, Go being the sort of progenitor of all these sort of this idea of the game where you're cutting your opponent off. Chicago Express has that with a little bit of a economy, not so much a stock market as you would see in 18xx games, but there's a share system where you're getting shares in different railroads, which allows you to control them. And it's got the thing with the kinds of Cube Rail games I love where you can take control or take a minority control of a company, have a minority share, and then sort of run it into the ground. If you see your opponent is like heavy in the yellow train and you're looking to derail their progress, you get one share of yellow and then you swerve yellow into the forest and have them underperform. A lot of things to consider in Chicago Express. Plays very quickly, but very, very tight, full of excruciating decisions, which is my favorite type of game. It feels like every time your turn comes up in Chicago Express, there are 3 things to choose from, and your decision on which action to choose and which train to manipulate always feels crucial, and I love that sort of like relatively short game, but every moment feels tense. So Chicago Express is my 28th favorite game of all time, and my favorite pure Cube Rails game.
So you have one sentence to tell Nealon why he's wrong for having Iberian Gauge on his list, but not Chicago Express.
I wouldn't say Iberian Gauge is wrong. I would say
and your
that
sentence is over.
I am not convinced.
Yes, right. Have you played Chicago Express?
I don't think I have.
Okay. I just feel like Chicago Express is one of the most distilled Cube Rail games in terms of like, I feel like Iberian Gauge and Irish Gauge, there's a little bit of a give there where I feel like Chicago Express from action number 1, it's like every decision feels very, very important. And so, yeah, it just, to me, feels like the most impactful of the Cube Rail game. But I love most of them, so hard for me to dissuade anybody from whatever they enjoy in that genre of game. Number 27 is a little bit of a wild card. I mentioned some of my games are going to fall in the aspirational bucket. This is aspirational insofar as I've only played it the one time, but was taken with it, and I'm hoping that it's going to be a game that, if not rises on my list, at least stays on the list. And this is one we all play together, Rise and Fall. I'm going to have
interesting.
27th favorite game of all time. Listeners to the show will know that we got a chance to play it for the first time at BarageCon a couple months ago. This is from the designer of Archipelago, one of our favorite games, and was one that I didn't even know about but when Kellen broke it out, but has a lot of the unique vibes from Archipelago. It's certainly not the same type of game, but has that unique feel and the sharp edges, and took some time to get used to it. But I appreciated its freshness. Like, there are games that I think can be sort of difficult to fully comprehend or fully grok, for lack of a better term. And this one, I think, while that was the case, I know especially for Christina, she had a hard time like really getting her arms around how the game worked, and it is unique in terms of like the mechanisms of it. But I think in the case of Rise and Fall, that paid off with a unusual game, a fresh experience. I keep using this word, but just felt unlike any area control game I played in the way that the card system is, in the way that your action selection is taking place. Just felt very, very unusual. Again, this is a very, very early take on it. We have only played the one game, but I found myself thinking about it probably more than any game that we played at BarageCon. It wasn't immediately my favorite game after playing it from our set of games played, but it has been one that I've been thinking about the most, and one that I am the most excited to play again. So that is Rise and Fall, new to the list at number 27.
I think that there's something really interesting about the confidence that first game gives you. And you know, it's something I think about a lot when it comes to creating these lists, about the balance of like, what do I most want to play next versus like, you know, what is like actually in my, however else you would define the top 50, right? I also came away from Rise and Fall thinking about it a lot. And I remember saying this at the time. Like, I certainly wasn't as enamored with it in the way that you're describing, but like, I remember saying this at the time, that it's a game that I could easily imagine a world where it becomes one of my favorite games. You know, like it has that sort of cadence about it. Learning the ways that the different units interact, the ways that you can sort of engineer strategies around combinations of different units is very, very interesting. I just think that there is so much at the edges of it that I just didn't sit well with me. But I'm very curious to like see how that plays out for you on repeat plays.
The other thing that I really like about it is that it also has a epic quality to it. You know, the fact that it's an area control games, I think in general lend themselves to a epic feeling because they are fighting for land, and there is something like sweeping about that. There's like, I'm fighting for my land versus, and there's some shifting of power and all that stuff that you get from it. And so it's definitely a game that its place will be probably quite volatile on my list, but In coming up with the list, I was trying to balance between games that I think are the best games of all time and it's a tough thing to figure out, but I wanted to sort of represent games that I'm most, as you said, sort of excited to play, and I just found myself very intrigued and excited about potential further plays of Rise and Fall.
I really like the system of decline, which like the entire thing is just a really easy hand game where it's like play this card and then move all your units of that type of unit. And so as you make more ships, every time you play a ship card, it gets better and better. But then this decline system is like if you're behind, if other people are scoring, you have to lose your cards. And so you lose your ability to even use certain units until you buy it back. And so just the sort of race aspect of that you can get got in the process, I really like. I do know what you mean, though. This designer sometimes feels like they're designing in a place that other people just aren't. And totally randomly, Neelan, but remember that one day we said we're going to make a 2-hour archipelago? The card system, it was called Tribulations, I think, at this point. The card system we were actually talking about was not...
It's not that dissimilar. You're
it's
right,
not this system.
Yeah.
So in a way... we came up with Rise and Fall. No, I'm excited to hear that. I hope that they do like a reprint of the Kickstarter because I think there's a lot of people who are eager to get this one.
Yeah, count me amongst them. My number 26 favorite game of all time is down 7 spots, but shares a lot of, at least, if not game systems, some of the theme of Rise and Fall. This is Tigris and Euphrates. This is, in a lot of ways, feels like the progenitor of what became Rise and Fall. This is Knizia's magnum opus area control war-esque game. I guess people can argue that it is a mathematically based game with a theme pasted on, but the theme I think really, really works for Tigris and Euphrates, where it's like a battle of empires and you are fighting for your civilization. It is a game that has a lot of big moments whenever you have a war that can, if you're on the losing end, feels devastating. I feel myself drawn to these epic games where I feel like we've played like maybe a filler game here or there, or a game to warm up the night or whatever, but when a game like Tigris and Euphrates comes out, even though it's not like a super long game, so it's not epic in that way, it just feels like, all right, this is a quote unquote like important, it just feels like a big game. It always feels like the centerpiece of a game night, and just a game that I have always enjoyed. It's dropped a little bit because I haven't played it in a while, aside from playing it on BGA, and there are some people on BGA who are just great at Tigris and Euphrates, so I feel like I'm getting hammered at it, and that might be part of the reason why. Again, I've been very honest about the fact that if I win at a game, it's going to move up these lists, and I'm not winning at Tigris as much as I want to, so maybe that's why it's going down a little bit. But Tigris and Euphrates is, again, Knizia is going to show up on our lists all over the place, and I think even though it is not my favorite of his games, I think it is probably his quote-unquote like greatest design. So that is number 26, Tigris and Euphrates, down 7 spots.
Where are you on team open scoring versus team closed information?
I'm closed information. I get the
right.
Open thing.
Why, Mark? I want to be the best tactician in the game, not have the best memory. That's all I care about.
It's not a memory game. Right,
tacticianing. Yeah. Memory doesn't matter. Who cares, bro?
Yeah, it shouldn't affect how you do it. Yeah, I get that. No, that just seems like just play chess at that point. If I do that.
I think I've only played this game like twice. I played Yellow and Yangtze probably 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
I've just gotten by people playing Tigris at cons.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that was fun. Glad we did that.
I think that was also my experience with it. At least earlier on. I've played it more recently in the last couple of years, but also only or mostly online. I think I've said enough times at this point that Yellow and Yangtze is still my preferred flavor.
Now. Yeah.
Okay, number 25 for me is new to the list. Another new to the list game. This is Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory, which I reviewed a little earlier, a couple months ago on the show. This is a game about not class warfare, but it's a very asymmetric game about different classes battling for control of their nation, their unnamed nation. There's a working class, capitalist class, middle class, and then a fourth player can be the government. And so it's quite asymmetrical, but you are all sort of playing things differently, but they all feed into each other. They all sort of work together in a way that I thought was really smooth. News list, I've only played it a couple times, but the theme works for me. It's right up my alley. And I like asymmetry in games when it just doesn't feel like people are doing like their own thing. Games like Vast, where everybody's playing like their own sort of mini game, is where asymmetry goes off for me. But Hegemony is a great example of a game where the asymmetry works because you have to work with the opposing factions to get yourself where you need to be. And so you've got a little bit of a negotiation there without being too heavily into negotiation. And yeah, it's just a game that the theme alone makes it work quite well for me. So Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory is my 25th favorite game of all time.
I did not realize how far up the BGG list has had skyrocketed recently. It is now number 30 on the top BGG list, which is wild to me because it's a game that, like, fairly recent. Like, it's
for sure.
For something that's only like a year and a bit old, that's a pretty big rise up the ranks. I got to check this out at some point.
Yeah, it looks like 30 strategy, 55 for overall.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at the strategy list. I apologize.
Yeah, but 55 overall,
sure, yeah,
quite high. And a game again that has like the epic feel without taking. I mean, I think it can go fairly long, but I think at the top end you're talking about 3 hours, but even then I think feels like on the longer end of what Hegemony is going to work for you. Okay,
would we mark prediction? Mark, not normally what we say to you, but do you like, because this is so long, do you think that Nealon and I would appreciate it? I know Nealon has a little more tolerance, but only a little more than me. Why are you laughing?
I don't think that's true. I think I have a lot more tolerance for
bro.
heavier games.
I thought I was being deferential. What? Oh my God, you would do this to me right here, right now?
I think you guys would both like it. I don't know if you would love it. I wonder how much the theme like sort of bumps it up for me, whereas like you guys can maybe take it or leave it. I think you would appreciate the interconnectedness of the factions, and I think you would appreciate a little bit of like the very, very light role play of the factions. Like I could see the capitalist Kellen really digging into that role. So
me out.
So there's that. I think you would like it. I don't think it would be maybe your top 50, but I think you guys would enjoy it.
This sounds like one that we're going to make a point to play in March then.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, add it to the list. Going back to the lists, my 24th favorite game of all time is up 8 spots from last year. Speaking of Knizia, this is one of his latest route building games and the 2019 Board Game Barrage Game of the Year. I can't remember. Blue Lagoon. Blue Lagoon is sort of like his sequel-ish to Through the Desert, although quite different. I mean, it's not as similar as some of his iterations to previous games, but Blue Lagoon is a game where there are different islands and you are creating routes from one island to the other. There are different things that you're trying to do. You're trying to have like the longest uninterrupted chain. You're trying to get to different resources on the island, but the crux of it is trying to do all this stuff before your opponents can cut you off. Again, this is a common theme in a lot of my favorite games where you need to get somewhere or get something and you're trying to count out, okay, I've got 3 placements until I get to that resource. Nealon has 4 placements, so I'm okay as long as he doesn't do anything, but as soon as he does something, I've got to act. I know what my cutoff is. I know where, like, maybe I've got 1 or 2 moves to play around with, but if Kellen starts moving towards whatever, I need to immediately go there. And is Kellen more preoccupied with something else? And maybe I can sneak and try to get something. It's all about that cutting players off that I just really enjoy, that tempo consideration that I love. And so Blue Lagoon, 24th favorite game of all time.
Yeah, I think you nailed the specific thing I love about Blue Lagoon, Mark, which is that specific, I can hold off until the right time that someone gets close and then I have to activate. That's present in a lot of Knizia's, like, Cascadero has it. Rebirth that we played recently has it. Like, there are elements of that throughout it, but it never feels like as sharp as it does in Blue Lagoon, where you just have your eye set on one thing on the board and you're just watching for someone to like dare to get close to it to the point that you can just like grab it from them. It's the whole game is wrapped up in a series of moments like that, and the trade-offs between, oh god, if I do this here, then I might not be able to get to this thing over there, and it's great.
There's nothing more frustrating in Blue Lagoon than like having 2 sort of goals in your head. Like, okay, I'm trying to get to this and I'm trying to do that. And then like having the number, like, okay, I've got 2 moves to play around with before I have to go on the right side, and I have like 1 move to play around with, and then maybe like you're tense about something, and then one of your opponents forces your hand somewhere, and you're like, God, can you just go for something else now? Because if you force my hand here, then you're giving my opponent a chance to beat me there, and just like that frustration, that tension is again something I just love with Blue Lagoon.
Yeah, I think this one is just excellent, and it almost has the sort of Care Bear aesthetic of like the Rebirth and the Havalandia, the balloon one, but this one is just much more cutthroat underneath it. And I think Rebirth prevents you from being as vicious. Is it Rebirth? Rebirth,
yeah.
Prevents you from being as vicious as you can be, but this just allows it to sort of exist there and sort of have to pin people into 3 things that they want to do, and then you can take advantage of what they're unable to do. Really, really good one.
Number 23 is down 8 spots, but frequent contributor to our Discord Woggers will be glad to hear that Lancaster is still on my list. This is, again, a very interactive game of area control, but also engine building. There's quite a number of different ingredients in the soup of Lancaster. You have the area control thing where, and this is probably my favorite part of a game that has a lot of different interesting parts, but my favorite part of Lancaster is you have this area control thing where you have pawns that are given numbers which represent the power that they have at a spot. They're called knights in this game, but like my knight of 3 is stronger than Callan's knight of 2 or whatever. But when you place one of your knights on a spot, the way that you can supplement that strength is by adding what are called squires. And for every squire you add a +1 to your knight's strength. But the whole trick of the game is if somebody beats you, if like, say I put my 3 knight with 2 squires, making it a level 5, and Callan comes in with his 2 knight and 4 squires, making it a 6, I get back my knight to place somewhere else, but I've lost all the squires that I placed. So all these temporary +1s that if you're displaced, you lose all of them. It's a game where if you want to start adding your squire somewhere, if you want to start expending that resource, you usually want to go in pretty hard. You usually want to dissuade anybody from coming over and topping you and then losing all your squires that are so valuable in the area control part of it. And then there's a engine building system where you're making yourself better at getting more squires or getting money and getting all these things. And then finally, another huge interesting part of it is the laws system, where every round there are going to be a number of laws that are proposed, and you can use your voting cubes to try to pass or fail laws. And this is where, again, some of this light negotiation that I've been talking about in other games like Hegemony comes in, where there's a law that will allow you to score more points than your opponents, and maybe there's one person that you want to work with that say like, hey, this is maybe not going to give you that many points, but it does give you some points. Yeah, it gives me more points, but if you vote for me here, I'll help you at a later vote. So there's that negotiation, sort of political maneuvering that I enjoy, and so Lancaster has that as well. So a lot of different like disparate parts that could otherwise be sort of clunkily added together, but I find all work pretty seamlessly with Lancaster. So that is my 23rd favorite game of all time, down 8 spots. My 22nd favorite game of all time is another area control-y older game, so there's another theme here linking them. This is down 4 spots, and this is the Grande, daddy of them all, pun intended, El Grande. The
criminally low.
One of the original.
Criminally low.
Yeah, you think so?
Down how many spots? It should
down
be
4 spots.
Yeah, it should be in your top 4. It shouldn't be down 4 spots.
You might be right. The thing is, I've played a lot of El Grande now, both in person, and BJ has an implementation that makes it quite easy to play.
Mark, too smart for El Grande Basada.
Well, I will say, you say that, but El Grande, look, I talked about Carvey earlier being a game that moved up my list because I was so good at it. And I'm telling you what, I'm getting pretty darn good at El Grande. So this maybe should go higher if if I'm good at it goes up thing proves true. But I was just playing El Grande online with some really strong players and thought I was done and was able to manage a win at the last minute. But El Grande is one of the original great area control games. It is area control stripped down, although there are these power card component where you have a hand of 13 cards and you are playing a card that will indicate where you are in turn order. So if you play 13, you're going to go first, but if you play 1, you go last. But if you play 13, you're not going to get any pawns to be added to your pool to be placed. And if you go 1, you're going to get a number of pawns to be added to your reserve to be placed out. So there's that consideration. The power cards, as they are named, are the different powers that you'll have during that round. So that's something else that you're simultaneously bidding on. But with those aside, the area control of El Grande is really simple. It's like this is Spain split up on the board into a number of different regions. They all have different scoring levels, and it's just however many pawns you have in there that determines your strength. And first place gets a certain number of points, second place, so on. And then you have the curveball of the Castillo, the infamous El Grande Castillo, where you can, instead of placing your workers on the board, you can throw them in the Castillo, and then at the end of the round, those workers are simultaneously assigned to different places and then sort of give you a unexpected boost in your troops at a location of your choosing. Yeah, El Grande is fantastic. If you haven't played El Grande and you are an area control fan and you're worried that this is an old game and may not be for you because of that, I am here to tell you should definitely try El Grande out because it is still fantastic. Number 21. Back to Knizia. Man, there's a lot of themes going on here in this little batch of games, but 21, up 6 spots. Another Knizia. This is Modern Art. Knizia's game about buying and selling art, being an art dealer. So the thing I love about this, which is something that I talked about with Tigris and Euphrates, this is a game that feels like it came from the mind of a mathematician. Like this is like feels like a very mathematically sound. This is like the most distilled auction game out there where it's all about auctions. Every turn in this, you are playing a card that is going to dictate one of 5 different auctions you can play. Like there's a once around auction, there is a simultaneous auction, there are different types of auctions. So this game is all about auctions. All it is auctioning in different forms. But the thing that pushes it over for me is the way that it does the scoring that ties so well with the theme. The idea is that in the first round, whatever artist of the 5 suits of artists sells the most will be worth the most points in that round. Second will be worth the second most. Third will be worth the third most. And then when the second round comes along, if an artist scores in the second round and they scored in the first round, they scored in the previous round, their score is the combined total. But if an artist doesn't score in the second round, they don't score even if they score in the first round. So the idea being that like it's sort of like mimicking the idea that in the art world, if an artist is hot, that their art becomes more and more valuable. But the moment that they are not in fashion, none of their previous value counts, and they've sort of like now become worthless. And so I just like that idea. And then in a subsequent round, if an artist comes back into the top 3, all their previous scoring comes back up, is now back in counted in their score. So it has that sort of like the fickleness of the art world where an artist can be hot and can be snowballing in value, and then all of a sudden becomes out of style and is out. But then if they come back, then all that previous value is there again. I just think that is a funny sort of commentary on the art world, and also works very well as an economic game and leads to interesting economic considerations. So Modern Art, number 21 for me, up 6 spots from last time.
Yeah, it's a really great example of like a auction game that is easy to explain, super accessible, and has just one twist that like really elevates it in a way that makes it feel super, super fresh. Like especially if you've never played Modern Art before and you're playing for the first time, like the first time that system like reveals itself, it's just really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting you describe it as like designed by a math guy, because I feel like this game is all about like hyping each other up into these, sort of artists and like being really jokey. I mean, I know there's a rock solid math auction game underneath all that, but it often becomes quite silly.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, number 20 is a game that we've mentioned previously. I think Kellen mentioned it when we were talking about Anomia. This is up 2 spots, and this is another stress-inducing
You're
party
about
game
to
that
tell
I love.
us that Pictomania is better than El Grande? Hang the phone up right now.
Pictomania is my 20th favorite game of all time. Look, the heart loves what it loves. That's all I'll say. Pictomania is a very simple premise. This is Pictionary, where you are both drawing and guessing at the same time. I mean, super simple idea, but in practice, it is just crazy, just wild. Among other things, I love the ascending difficulty of the clues that you can play with. So there are, I think, 5 levels of clues you can play with, where the most basic cards are like cat, dog, whatever. And then the most advanced cards can be like concepts like the past and, memory or whatever. But what it comes down to is that whole simultaneous drawing and guessing thing, where everybody, again, is like frantically trying to draw, but also keeping eyes open and around the table trying to guess, because the quicker you're able to guess, the more points you're able to get. And at the same time, you're encouraged to draw well. You can't just guess without drawing, because you need to have your drawing guessed by your opponents, or you're going to lose points for not having a good enough drawing. So just the idea of simultaneous guessing and drawing Pictionary on its face is great, but when you play Pictomania, like it shows how fun the experience can be. So again, a game that feels like one that I should be able to bring out to anybody, no matter whether or not they're gamers or not, but in practice can be sort of tense, but it's just a game I love. So Pictomania, my number 20 favorite game of all time, up 2 spots.
Yeah, it's tough, because while I definitely acknowledge that there is just that component of that a lot of people are going to have a hard time with, I do think that Pictomania is, when it's at its best, it's just so funny. There's one thing in particular I love, which is that, once you've started guessing, you can no longer go back to your drawing. So you have that like moment of hubris of just thinking, okay, I've nailed this, I'm done, I'm going to start guessing, and everyone starts looking at your drawing and they're like, what is that? And then it's just like, you're just sitting there being like, come on, you can see what this is so clear.
Right.
It's great. It has so much great like silly banter as you're playing it. It's a delight. I love Pictomania.
And I think the variable difficulty of the cards allows it to be a game that you can bring out with people who are not necessarily gamers. Whereas with Anomia, I'm a little hesitant. Pictomania, I've definitely brought out with people who are otherwise not gamers, because of just like when you say Pictionary, and you can even say Pictionary where you're guessing and drawing at the same time, and people sort of immediately get it. So
I do think the second edition dumbification was just a twist in the right direction. I know not everyone will agree, but for those of us who aren't amazing artists, I'm trying to think of one amazing artist. I can't think of one. I was going to say Picasso, but people don't think he's an amazing artist, do they? Who's an amazing artist?
I think Picasso does work as an amazing artist. I think that's not a controversial take. But
I have no take on artists. I retract.
Picasso in this respect would not work so well. All right, number 19. This is up 21 spots. This is a BGA bump. This is a trademark BGA bump. This is because I played this game a ton, and now the expansion is out there. Marine. This is Ark Nova, a game that when Nealon first taught it to us, I would never ever have guessed it would be on my top 50, much less rocketing up 21 spots. But I love Ark Nova. This is in a lot of ways similar to a game with a huge deck. Terraforming Mars feels like it has a lot of the same DNA, but while I never got on with Terraforming Mars, I've played it on BGA, still doesn't really work for me. Ark Nova, I just really enjoy it. The theme of building a zoo really helps. It makes it colorful. It makes it interesting. You have all these different animals represented, but it's a game where you go in, I think, with like a general strategy. There are shared goal cards, and you have your own personal private goal card, which all sort of combine to point you in a direction that you're sort of playing towards. But it's also a game where you need to pivot quite often. And I appreciate a game where in a world where Euros sort of encourage find your path, min-max, hit it hard, don't think about it, just like find your path and just go as hard as you can. I appreciate games that force you to think on your feet. Cards come up in the card row and you think to yourself, oh, actually, I hadn't considered that card, but now that it's up there and the sort of timing works out, maybe I will go and try that sort of spin on my strategy. The action selection is a unique system that I think works well and makes for, interesting decisions where you have 5 different actions. Everybody has the same 5 different actions, and where they come up in your conveyor belt of your actions is something to consider. Marine, which I've just started playing, actually has more powerful versions of those cards, and you draft them. So, whereas original Ark Nova, everybody had the same animals card or same card. Now you can draft cards that make your starting 5 cards asymmetric, and that's sort of an interesting take on it. I haven't really gotten into Marine so much, but just again, a game that generally I would sort of shy away from expansions with games. A lot of the games on my list have expansions that I don't really play with very often, but with Ark Nova, the variety seems to just integrate well with the theme and with how the game sort of plays. And again, at its heart, a game where you have to think on your feet and be tactical, which I very much appreciate. So Ark Nova, my 19th favorite game of all time.
I didn't realize that Marine had made its way to Board Game Arena. Was that a recent change? Because I've only great. I've only played it once in person, and my take then was that it was a good expansion, but not an essential one. But I do. You're reminding me of the fact that the actual action cards you have, you get those buffed action cards you can draft, is something that I had forgotten. Which is that's a fun change. Like that's kind of what you'd want, because like no matter how many games you play of Ark Nova, those same 5 action cards are going to be the same every single game, obviously, but like Marine World changing that up, that's a good change, and something I kind of want to play around with a little bit more now that it's on BGA for sure.
Yeah, and I definitely don't mind playing vanilla Ark Nova, because I appreciate when everybody has the same cards, because I sort of know where my opponents are coming from.
Yeah,
and that's a good way to play it. But like I said, like a fresh take on the action cards is cool too. Number 18. Speaking of fresh, this is probably one of the most unique games on my list. This is up 3 spots, and this is Stationfall. I always get sense playing Stationfall that it is like being in a wacky sci-fi movie. It is a game where you're all on a spaceship, but nobody knows which roles people are invested in. You can control the different roles, but everyone has their own sort of like scoring system, and you're not sure who is sort of in playing which role because they have it or they're trying to lead you astray. And my most overriding thought when it comes to playing Stationfall is the wacky action movie where whatever you would like sort of like picture a character doing, things you would imagine in a action sci-fi movie, you feel like you can do them in this game. It feels very cinematic and thematic. The example that I go back to is there's an ability in the game to jump out of the front of the plane and land in the back of the plane. You can sort of see your character doing it as you're doing it. A game that just feels wild, feels like unlike any other game on my list or that I've played. And while it's a game that is hard to teach because of different roles and different scoring, whatever, it just feels, again, very, very fresh. So Stationfall up 3 spots to my 18th favorite game of all time.
There's like an inherent level of role playing was the word I was going to say. That's like inherent.
Sure,
it's like, it's not exactly that, but it kind of brings it out a little bit, where it's like for what is effectively, still a strategy game. Like there are ways to play Stationfall well, but your plans are always going to get mixed up by the random assortment of actions that other characters can take. But it always ends up feeling like this crazy emergent narrative unfolding from game to game to game. I adore it.
Number 17 on my list is another Knizia game. This is another route buildy sort of game, but maybe more truly route buildy because it also is a train game. This is Stephenson's Rocket. This is Knizia's, I guess, sort of cube rally sort of game with a stock aspect to it. But my favorite part of Stephenson's Rocket is the veto system, where if you want to move a train, if somebody else has stock in that train, they have the opportunity to veto the movement. So you take your action, you say the train's moving this way, and Kellen said, well, I have a share in blue train, and no, we're not going that way. And so I love the brutality of those kind of actions. It is super, super well designed, as every Knizia game is, and most Knizia games are quite brutal, but this one feels especially rough when you get that veto action there. It's got a simple stock system, which I enjoy as well, and yeah, just a fantastic Knizia's cube rail game. I just love it. Stephenson's Rocket, my 17th favorite game of all time, up 13 spots.
I would say that if you have a group of like us, do not play a game with a veto system in it because the only option is veto. Oh, well, this is a good one, Mark. This is on my shelf behind me. I wondered if you'd still consider it a train game, and it sounds like it barely hits the criteria, so I accept.
Yeah.
I've always thought of it like kind of acquire adjacent as well in a weird way. I mean, that's maybe just because of but there's the merging, going on and the different things like that too.
Number 16, new to the list, another Knizia. And this is a game that played for the first time at Dice Tower West, Cascadero. This again has the route building. Yeah, this has the Blue Lagoon route building that I love so much, with a little bit of a combo-rific aspect to it, where you're moving up different tracks and getting bonuses and moving up other tracks because you got a bonus on this track and a lot of that kind of stuff. But at its core, again, has that tempo consideration that is in Blue Lagoon. But for all that's going on, for all the comboing that's going on. Very straightforward. We played this for the first time in Dice Tower West, and then I taught it. And I think I talked about this on a previous show not too long ago, where it was so streamlined. The rule set was so clear and simple that I was able to, without really consulting the rules, and after playing it for my first time ever, teach it 2 more times during the course of that convention. And every time I had a great time, and everybody I played with it had a great time. It has the Knizia twists of you're only eligible to win if you've gone up to the top of sort of your individual track. So there is that added part to it where, there is a threshold that you must meet. And so I appreciate that part of it. So there's always some goal you got to keep an eye on, and some way to get yourself eliminated if you're not careful. But again, at its core, it's the tempo, it's the route building that I enjoy, and cutting people off. But also this game encourages people to work together, because you move up the tracks more if you join people at the different cities that are represented on the board. So Cascadero is my 16th favorite game of all time. I've played it quite a few times since first playing it in March, and have loved every play of it. Number 15 is my third Knizia in a row. This is one of his auction trilogy, and my favorite of the set. This is Raw. Raw is a set collection game where you are pulling tiles out of a bag. You're adding them to a common pool that is going to be auctioned. But there are a couple of different sort of like crucial parts to Raw. But the first one being that everybody has 3 bidding chips, basically, that have different values to them, and the auctions are once around, and whatever bidding chip is the one that wins, that lot becomes auctioned in the next lot. So if you have a strong chip that will definitely win, you can use it, but then you're just giving it to your opponent to win for the next round. There is a strong push your luck element in Raw, where if everyone has used their 3 bidding chips and are now then out of the round, you can be the last person standing and then just try to put as many items in the lot as possible. But there are the Raw tokens that, if they're drawn, act as a timer to end the round. And so you'll often find yourself in a game of Raw where it is towards the end of a round, everybody's out but one player, and if they draw 1 or 2 more Raw tokens, the round will end, but they're trying to push their luck to draw in more and more things to add to the lot, because they'll win it no matter what their bid is. But if they draw the Raw token, the round will end and they'll get nothing. So there's a high tension moments in Raw when that kind of stuff happens. Just a fantastic game. The set collection is unique in terms of the different types of sets you're trying to build. Some last from round to round, and there are things you accumulate and will have throughout the course of the game. Some are one round and done, and so there's a lot of things to consider in that. But the set collection, for all the variety, is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward, but the beauty is that sort of like a push your luck and bidding system that I love so much. So Raw is my 15th favorite game of all time, down a spot from last year.
What about the inherent tension when someone is looking in the bag while they're drawing tiles?
Right. There is that too. For people who don't know, I think that was a Patreon where I talked about a contentious game of Raw where shenanigans were happening. But yeah.
I'm actually, Mark, has this always been this high on your list?
It's always been pretty high on my list, yeah.
Yeah. This is
I
one.
I feel like I play it at least twice a year, and every time I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I can't really remember having too many bad games in a row.
I played it 3 or 4 times this year, and this just perfectly, to me, encapsulates the, like, everyone will like this game if they like hobbyist board games, and no one will say it's their favorite game. And maybe that's wrong, and maybe there are those people. No. Again, it's a really good game. I own it. I have the deluxe whatever edition, and I'm not trashing it. And like, I think it's such a good suggestion for so many swaths of people. But I don't know. It's still, at the end of the day, it's like I don't know. Maybe I haven't had that high in a couple of games where someone goes on like a run and everyone is like really tense watching them pull by themselves. And maybe that's what I've been missing. It's
maybe like the double-edged sword of like how streamlined it is, because while you have that like that fun push your luck and the simplicity of the bidding system, it is a set collection game at its core, and maybe that's not like exciting enough, or there's not enough there to make it anybody's favorite. But yeah, as you said, most people will definitely enjoy themselves playing it. Okay, number 14, down 10 spots, primarily because I don't think I've played it in a little bit. This is the Splotter Classic Bus. the Splotter worker placement game Bus with a very interesting sort of like a worker placement system where the worker placement spots are fixed on the board, sort of along the lines of a game that has dropped off my list, Dominant Species, where the spots are fixed, you know, the order that they work in, and yet the tension there is that like some of the actions that fire off first will affect how the actions that happen later in the round play out. And so there's the trying to figure out, am I going to place a worker there? Because if I do, that's going to affect what I can do later on in the round. There's also the unique aspect where you have all the workers that you're going to have for the entire game at the beginning of the game, and you theoretically could use most of them in round 1 and run out in, say, round 2 or 3, and you might, you know, build yourself up a really good advantage because you've placed all these workers, but you literally will have no workers at the end of the game. And so that is an interesting aspect to it. Not that that happens very often, but there is something to keeping an eye out on how many workers your opponents have towards the end of the game, because, you know, they're limited in terms of like what they can do. It's also got a little bit of that tempo thing, maybe a lot of the tempo thing, where you're trying to ferry people around this board. You are running bus lines, and there is a lot of timing as to trying to get people on your turn to where they need to go while your opponents are trying to intercept them and you know, lead them to their own destinations or trying to ferry them around themselves. So there is that tempo consideration that I enjoy. Yeah, I just another straightforward game, maybe of all of Splotter's games, one of their more straightforward in terms of being one of their lighter games, although I would not call it a light game, but not as heavy certainly as games like Food Chain Magnate and Horseless Carriage and the like. But one just I really, really enjoy, that is Bus, my 14th favorite game of all time. Down 10 spots, but I think primarily because I just haven't had a chance to play it in a while. Number 13. This is up 15 spots because I've got a chance to play it quite a few times after playing it for the first time, I think, last year. This is Tramways by Alban Viard. So Viard has a lot of games, sort of feels like Friedman Fries, or I forget the designer of Archipelago. What's his name? Christophe Bollinger or something? Christophe, whatever.
Yeah. Bollinger. Who could say?
Bollinger.
But you better than me.
But I don't think it's Bollinger. I think that's like a dish that I've called them. But anyway, but those designers, I think, where all their games feel really different. Viard's games always feel, to me, like games that were designed by somebody who doesn't necessarily play a lot of, or isn't like immersed in the hobby that much, and that's probably absolutely incorrect, but just the games always feel quite unique. Like Town Center is a game I've played of his, Clinic, Small City, these are all games that just feel unique. Each one feels like nothing I'd seen before. And so Tramways, in the same sort of vein as those other games. It is a game where you are, again, building routes, trying to connect people around your city, but it's got a very interesting auction system that I talked about in depth in reviewing the game earlier, but a lot of like fresh mechanisms. There's a card action selection system where the more cards you play, there's like a negative aspect to them. There's just a game unlike any game that you've maybe ever played before. And yeah, I just love seeing designs that feel unlike anything else. Mentioned this was Rise and Fall earlier, and Tramways is very much like that. So Tramways, my 13th favorite game of all time, up 15 spots just because I have played it and enjoyed many plays over the last year. Okay, number 12. This is down 3 spots because I have not had a chance to play it again after playing it a couple times early, but I have a hard time apologizing for this because this one is a beast. This is Mr. President, the American Presidency, 2001 to 2020. This game is a monster. This game is a game that you will not play over the course of one night, I don't think. This is a game that took me, I think my first play took like something like 2 weeks to play, but it lends itself, thankfully, to setting it out on a table and playing a couple rounds of it and then leaving it, then coming back. And for a game like that, like for a game that I think plays that way, I think it does it just about as well as you could possibly ask for it. I mentioned this in reviewing it, but for a game that's as sprawling as this is, and this game is like, I mentioned earlier, like epic games. This is like a game that feels epic to me. You're the American president and you're dealing with things all over the world. I took pictures of this and posted them on our Discord just to show how much of it, like this is like the table hog of all table hogs. I'm sure there are games that are bigger in terms of space that is required, but it's going to be hard to find many. I had quite a big table, and this took the entire thing. Setting this game up my first time took about an hour, just because it is just, again,
listen to
massive.
yourself, Mark.
I know. But this is worth it, because for a game as massive as this is, I called it when I was reviewing it, a game that you could, for as big as this is, just play immediately without having to like really read the rule books. And I know that is a crazy thing to say, but it is built to play that way. It has, speaking of rule book, it has like 7 rule books, but the main one that you're using to take your turns and follow along, as you're taking your actions, is very, very clearly laid out. I'm telling you, like, if I took the hour to set this game up for you and just said, here's a rule book, start playing now, you could do it. For as sprawling as this is, and for as like crazy this game is, it is built acknowledging how cumbersome it potentially could be, and just breaks everything into bite-sized pieces. Every round, what you're doing is like clearly stated, and you can just take your actions, and you can step away, and you can come back and not worry about, oh, where was I? Because everything is very, very clearly laid out. It's a marvel of design in that respect. And again, not even all that said, I know it's not going to be for everyone. It's not going to be for most people who are listening to this, but for people who like historical stuff, as I do, for people who want like something that feels grand and epic and sweeping, it's like a perfect Mark game in that way. Like, for all that said, it dropped 3 spaces, and I'm wondering, why did it drop 3 spaces? Probably because like I haven't played it in a long time. Would I like it to be trimmed down? Like, would I like this game to be a game that is more accessible even to me, somebody who loves it? And the answer, I feel like, is no. The grandness, the craziness of the game is part of the reason why I love it so much. Like, I don't think I'd want an easier to play Mr. President. I don't think I'd want some of the crazy grandeur of it to be stripped down, because that's what it's there for. Like, it's there to be like a game where you are worried about every part of the world, and you've got all these like fires going off and just crazy. So yeah, Mr. President, 12th favorite game of all time, down 3 spaces, but still talking about it has gotten me itching to clear off the table upstairs and set it up. Although I know Roselle will not be too big a fan of that.
I think there's something to be said for the fact that you're willing to, like, because I was going to ask before you just said that, like, what is the likelihood that you end up playing this again? And like the fact that you are still clearly excited to play it again is saying a lot. So yeah, that's great.
I mean, I'm talking myself about, like, talking about it has got me like super excited because again, if this game was hard to play, that would knock it down significantly. The last thing I'd want to do is have to go through a rule book and learn a game that is this sprawling. Like that would be such a bummer. But I just know, after having played it a couple times last year, that's not going to be an issue. That is like absolutely not going to be an issue. I'm going to be able to jump right into it. And it's, even though I don't remember the rules basically at all, I'm not concerned at all about picking it back up. So yeah, very, very excited to play it again. And yeah, 12th favorite game of all time, down 3 spots. All right, number 11, last game for today. This is in the exact same spot as last year. This is Caylus 1303, a game that I actually played just last week and enjoyed. This is the second edition, basically, of Caylus, and I've forgotten how streamlined and how different it is than the original. I mean, it shares a ton with Caylus. It shares the best stuff with Caylus, but it is a different game for sure. For those who have not played Caylus or Caylus 1303, it's a worker placement game where you are building the worker placement spots. You're building the buildings that the players are going to get the resources. But the big twist here, the big crux gimmick of Caylus and Caylus 1303 is there is the provost. You're building these buildings along this road that leads to the castle. And the provost is a unit that you have shared control over with your opponents. And wherever the provost winds up at the end of a round, after your manipulations, any building in front of the provost is not going to fire off. So you're placing your workers out, and you're placing them out up and down the road. But then as the provost is manipulated, the workers you've placed with the intention of getting resources, and there's a cost for placing these workers. So you're placing your workers out at a cost that is significant in this game. And then your opponents can conspire to move the provost in such a way that that building that you were counting on doesn't fire off, and it can be a brutal aspect. You can have some very tense negotiations, pleading with your opponents to just like have their building fire off this time. And there's a lot of like watching to see where your opponents place their workers, because you can tell, like, if your opponents are placing their workers near where the provost is in a danger zone, you realize, okay, if they're placing them there, then I can place them there because clearly they want their buildings to fire off and we can work together. And so my workers are not at risk. It's a game where every game of it will play out differently based on how aggressive you and your opponents are. The one mark against the original Caylus was, even though that I think was true, the games being different based on the play styles of the players, there was a very static quality to the original Caylus because you had the exact same buildings every game, and if you had a strategy, you could try to employ it, even though, again, the dynamics of the game might change it. Caylus 1303 adds a lot of different aspects to it that make each game different. There are different buildings that start already placed out on the board. Different buildings are sort of out of play. There's more variety to Caylus 1303, but while keeping a lot of the original great DNA of the original Caylus. So I would say that if you're a fan of original Caylus, definitely try 1303. If you like very heavily interactive games, then also Caylus 1303 is a great game to try out. 1303 streamlines Caylus in a lot of ways that just makes it more appealing and easier to teach and more approachable to modern audiences. So yeah, Caylus 1303, my 11th favorite game of all time, same spot from last year. Great interactive cutthroat game.
It's funny, like I had a similar experience with the last time I played Caylus on Board Game Arena, and I think your point about what makes a good interactive game is very on point, because I was playing it on BGA, because the original Caylus is all that's on BGA, and I had that experience of just thinking like, wow, this just isn't as aggressive as I remember it being, and it was just a reflection of the people playing. I don't even remember who those people were, just some randoms on BGA, I assume. And then I remember that the last time I played Caylus 1303, like, Kellen f***ed me. And that that's like a good indication of like how dramatically different it can play just based on the people you're with, and like how specific players can really just bring out different elements of it. Like, yeah, great game.
And then that's why you love the game, right?
No, that's why I never played it for so long after that. I was like, this game's awful.
Scarred.
One bad play.
Yeah, but yeah, to your point, the game can absolutely be like very non-confrontational and friendly, and like a game where you can, get a lot of resources and build really great buildings and do all this stuff and get a lot of points, or it can be just a slugfest where like nobody's allowing anything and like all your resources are just there to survive or to hurt your opponents. And so every game can be quite unique and different. So, yep, fantastic game. And that is going to do it with games 30 to 11 on my top 50 games of all time. Tune in next week to Neelan's 30 to 11. We'll see how that goes. Very excited to hear Neelan's list. If you have comments on where my 30 to 11 shook out, go to boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. The discussion for my 50 to 31 was fun to interact with and see. Go to our podcast channel where people are going to be discussing it there, hopefully. And as always, you can find us on all forms of social media. You can email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid? And until next week, when Neelan steps up with his 30 to 11, goodbye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye.